Let's rock and roll. Let's do this, Damien.
Okay.
So, Damien, did some study. Obviously, I knew you were coming on. We know each other from an event that we did. Wow. Maybe 6 years ago.
Gosh, that
No,
long.
is that... Have I got that right? A long time ago.
Could be, yeah.
It was a great event. We spoke about mental health. We raised some money for the charity Calm. Since then, things haven't really improved statistically, unless you've got other data that I don't know of. But it says here roughly 6,000 suicides per year in, I don't know whether that's UK or England, sorry, but it's around 700 across the world. 3/4 of those are men. However, it was quite interesting to me that it said women attempt suicide more than men.
Mm-hmm.
However, 75% of those rates are coming from the guy side. Why do you think that figure is so high? Why do you think it's not on the decrease, given that stigma is probably reduced? There are more services, I'd say, now to help people struggling with their mental health. It's talked about more often. We're on this podcast talking about it now. Why would you say it's not improving?
It's a really difficult question to answer, but you're right. It seems to be a stable rate. It seems to be 3/4, and it doesn't seem to be getting better. And in many parts of the world, that's the case, that men are more likely to die by suicide. I don't know the answer. I think you're right that women do self-harm more than men, so there are higher rates of self-harm, but men are more likely to complete suicide. And what we think, as a social scientist, what I think is going on is what we call a hidden distress. Okay, so the idea that if you think about depression, for example, it's kind of like the symptoms that we look at are the ones that women have. Okay, so lack of self-confidence, self-hatred, sort of turning in on themselves and going internally. Whereas, for example, men are more likely to experience their depression more externally, which means they might lash out at other people, get angry, and so on. But we don't necessarily measure those sorts of symptoms. Men turn up in prison much more than women, obviously, and around about it's a very high percentage of those men have mental health problems. Men are much more likely to go missing, become homeless. So what we think is happening is that we're just not measuring the kinds of issues that men face. So it tends to go underground.
Okay.
It doesn't turn up in the mental health system. Okay. So we're in a way you could say we sort of feminize mental health, and we make it more. We're catching women. But we think what's happening is we're missing the men because they're not expressing their distress in ways that we're looking for. They're quite good also. Men are very, very good at hiding their distress. From the research, what we decipher is that men can endure high levels of distress before they kind of snap or before they express that distress. So oftentimes you'll hear mothers say of their son, or friends and mothers say, "Oh, but he was so bubbly," of a son who has died by suicide. So I think that's what's going on. That it's very hard to kind of reach those sorts of men. If that's what's happening, if it's all going underground, then obviously the prevention of suicide for men is a bit more difficult. Not that I think we need to be positive, because I think suicide prevention really works, and there are some countries where they have suicide strategies which are directed at men, and I think that's a really good thing to do.
What are those strategies?
Just the idea of recognise it. Here we don't sort of necessarily see masculinity as a something that we should be focusing on in terms of preventing suicide. Whereas in Australia, they've got lots of programs. They have a men's kind of policy, a program, a way of focusing on men. So it's a big issue in Australia. Don't know why we don't do it here, but we don't tend to focus on the issue of masculinity and men in this country.
Do you see it as an issue?
I think so. I think
because it's on the list of one of the causes here. So relationship breakdowns, lack of close friends, loneliness, unable to open up, deprivation, fact, it says 10 times more likely to commit suicide if you've got high financial stress.
Yes.
Emotional illiteracy, changes in midlife, personal traits, and then masculinity was on that list.
Yeah.
I didn't understand it. I don't know what that means and what contributing factor that might have to suicide.
What is so
masculinity?
So all those things that you've read out are true. I mean, they really are the contributing factors to men and higher rates of suicide. Masculinity is maybe if I ask you, what is masculinity? What do you think it is?
Well, see, I view it as a healthy thing. You know, if we're talking about, so we spoke about, you know, the inability to step forward when you're struggling. For me, that's courage, bravery. So I can wrap masculinity in personal responsibility. For me, that's kind of at the core of it, and self-discipline. All the things I believe you need, and all the things I've experienced in my own life. My life is always so much better when my discipline's intact. And that means the discipline to ask for help when you need it, the discipline to do the right things day to day, the discipline to habitually set your life up so that your head stays in a relatively okay space, working out, drinking water, doing all the things that are kind of out there and are told. But I always feel like the mental health industry likes to bypass that and to go like 10 levels deep. And I'm like, well, why don't we just go 1 level deep for now? But this seems to go over people's heads, and they don't kind of want to have these conversations with me about personal responsibility around mental health.
Yeah. So, I mean, the question I'd ask you is, what has supported you to, because not all men see masculinity in that way.
Sure.
What has supported you to be able to kind of have a positive masculinity?
Living my life without what I felt was good masculine traits, so discipline, so on, that led me to having a breakdown. And then there were certain role models in my life that were classed as masculine men. And they're kind men, they're gentlemen, but they're stand-up men, they do the work, they are protectors, they are providers. You know, and there's obviously a feminist angle from this, that, you know, men don't need to do that anymore, be providers and protectors. But for me, it's quite healthy, it's innate, it's quite natural for me to want to protect my mother, my father now, my, you know, whatever family I have, my friends. It's within me, and I don't know why you wouldn't want to have a healthy version of masculinity in you. That's where the debate is, what's healthy about it and what's not. So that word toxic masculinity comes up all the time. Still not quite sure what that is, so maybe you can help me work this one out. But that's kind of how I view it as a healthy thing. I look at guys who I respect. They are masculine men, physical men, but they're very gentle, very kind.
Okay. So, I mean, that's great that you've been able to, develop your masculinity along those lines. Toxic masculinity, I think it's been made up by the media. It's not a real thing.
Really? The media make things up?
I think,
No way, Damien, what are you on about?
I mean, you know, like...
Come on, man. I've heard some crazy things, Damien.
But that's a bit too much to say. But so it's kind of a media. It's made up by the media. I don't think it's not really an academic term. It's not very helpful. It kind of tars all men with this horrible brush. I also worry about how young men are going to kind of take on board that kind of message that comes with the idea of, you know, masculinity being toxic. So, but I think what it's pointing to is that masculinity is something that's not. It's kind of something that we agree to, in a sense, okay? It's kind of something that's not within you or me, but it's something that is expected, in a way, expected of us. I'll try and give you an example of what I mean. So we did research with first responders. We did research with police, in particular, and firefighters, okay? And we're very interested in how they process their mental health issues through their work. Men and women? Only men in this study. Okay. So how do they deal with their distress? And we found a very interesting finding, which we weren't really expecting, was there was a vast difference between the way police are and how firefighters are. Okay. So what we found was that the police force is very hierarchical. Like police go out on the beat with each other, but they might have different partners every day, so they don't form these kind of close relations. Those higher up the chain are, that may be very competitive, very ambitious. So they can't necessarily be trusted. So there seems to be the structure that doesn't allow police to open up, to be, to talk to each other, to kind of debrief. But what we found with in the fire service was that they had these things called hot debriefs, where it sort of created this space where, particularly after a very harrowing job, they could come together and they could be emotional, talk about that, process it together, But also the other thing is, like their managers would ride out with them on the appliances to these fires and things, and so it was very much kind of flatter in hierarchy. So what we found is that what's really important is the way that organizations structure masculinity. Okay, so you have this very detached, competitive, kind of like the enforcer type thing happening in the police force, where there's a bit of fear of the feminine side. But then, in the ambulance, in the fire service, then there's a chance to actually kind of like, debrief, work things through, more so than in the police force. So there was a chance to process some of that vulnerability. Okay, so I'm kind of like characterizing it, just to make the difference here, just to show. But the key thing really is that masculinity was different in the way that masculinity was thought about. So I think what I'm saying is that in the fire service, it was much more akin to maybe what your kind of masculinity is.
Yeah.
So I'd say maybe you'd thrive in an environment like that.
The fire brigade for sure, but I don't see that as a non-masculine environment.
Yeah.
In fact, the opposite.
Yeah.
I like guys coming together after a hard day's graft.
Yeah.
And seeing some traumatic events, sitting down and debriefing, and I don't see that as a non-masculine.
No, and it's not, and they don't see that as non-masculine either.
Sure.
So what I'm saying, what I think I'm saying is that there are some places in society where it's masculinity is kind of nurtured in a more positive way. The idea of talking about emotions and so on, opening up. There are other parts of society where that's not so possible at the moment, and it makes a big difference. So the police were talking about how what they do is they go home and kind of like take it out on their partners, or sort of they have arguments at home, and or that their partners would be trying to kind of help them work through those issues. So it puts a lot of strain on partnerships, and there were lots of talk about broken down relationships and so on in the police force.
Okay.
So
where else do you believe it shows up, this kind of not so healthy form of masculinity in modern day society? Well,
I mean, maybe flipping that over, and where does it show up? Where are places where it can be particularly healthy? So we did some research in a meditation community, for example, and we found a particularly healthy masculinity, but with a kind of like a interesting twist. So what we found was the kinds of qualities that were nurtured, were the idea of being, not using substances, being open, being emotional, being responsible, being helpful, and so all these sorts of things that you're talking about.
Sure.
But the interesting thing is that the competition didn't go away. Okay. So
competition.
Masculinity is inherently competitive.
Sure. Healthy, right?
Well, I think so. I think that it's not going to go away. Okay.
No.
So I think but what so for example, what I mean is that there was kind of a you could have like a hierarchy to sort of like who could be the most spiritual. So in a way,
right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, you're going to have they're going to be positive aspects, but you're not going to take the competitiveness away, because I think masculinity is inherently competitive. Okay, you have kind of what we call hegemonic masculinity, and then the more marginalized types of masculinity. Yeah.
Do you see that as an issue?
No, I just think that's the way that that society kind of is organized. I think it was I guess it was a surprise for me, that research, because I thought maybe the competition might go away, but it just didn't. But I don't think that's a bad thing. So a competition to to be the most open or vulnerable, I think, is better than being who can be the worst kind of person, who could be like the Farages, or who could be like the
okay. Yeah, and I don't know if that's society or that's human nature. I often get this confused sometimes. People say it's society. I'm not sure it is. This inability for men to open up. I don't know whether that's just I mean.
What do you think? Yeah, what do you think that is?
Well, I like to trace it back and go, well, how were we different 100 years ago? Were we opening up then? No. What about 200 years ago? Probably not. So I don't know if it's ever been there. And this expectancy around men suddenly becoming vocal and expressing how they feel, and I don't think that that's going to happen. So I'm like, okay, and even if that is a message that we should encourage, right? It's like, well, how many men are going to? Probably very few. So what are they willing to do? And they might be more willing to get involved in competitive sports that are good for them, or competitive environments. Because I think a lot of teaching comes when it comes in the actual essence of the competition. So like if we go mountain climbing, for example, there is a bit of competition, but it's afterwards that the men have bonded, that the communication starts to form. So it's like we've all struggled together. If you think what Iron Men do, they all get that tattoo on their calf, or the Royal Marines Commando have a tattoo, and you see that on someone else, and you go automatically respect. You've been through what I've been through, and I think there's potentially more chance of getting men involved in positions like that. However, I do feel like that might create a bigger gap between the guys that sit at home on their computer doing nothing versus the ultra competitive guys. But is it if you watch any nature program, is this the real harsh reality where it's survival of the fittest?
Yeah.
Is it? Is that just something we just do not want to look at because it's so horrendous and people are going to get left behind? People are going to, you know what I mean? It's like, wow, is that the reality? And can I look at that?
Yeah. So I agree with you. I think that for whatever reason, we have there's a cultural imperative right now for men to open up. Lots of the mental health programs are, just all you have to do is open up and, and talk about your mental health stuff. And this is not, that's ridiculous for many men. The idea of putting men in that position where they're expected to open up. Well, first of all, a lot of men, when they do open up, have a very bad reaction from other people. Okay, so for example, health professionals, we've talked to men who, their GP is kind of like been tapping on their watch and saying, well, I've got no time for this issue. You've had your issue, and they've been suicidal. Or partners who have left them because they've opened up. So it's not necessarily safe to open up or useful to open up, and so I think that in that example that I gave of the police force versus the fire brigade, it might be more possible for men in the fire brigade to open up compared to the police force. But what is important is what other supports around you to open up. Okay, the key thing is safety, and most men don't have that safety to open up. So, I mean, do you? Is there somebody that you feel that you can open up to?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So who's that person?
Well, I have a specific mentor, Jeff, and I have a group of men. We come into the room here and we open up there. But still, would I do it off my own back? And no, not really. So there's something blocking me from doing that. Yeah. It's interesting to say about the police. It's not like it's police people, and it's surely the infrastructures, right?
It's the structure of it's the organization. It's what it's what's available to you. Some men have more support around them to open up, and that's a possibility. For other men, they'd sooner fly to the moon and back than open up. So it's what's available to you. And I think you're pointing to something that's important, is that often it's kind of like doing men maybe say doing things together. Well, maybe I think that men kind of express their emotions differently to women many times as well. So like for example, men might express their closeness by I don't know, like laying into each other, for example. Okay, so you could, if you're very close to some man, you could like really insult them, and they insult you back, and that's kind of an expression of intimacy in a way. But you're going to miss that, aren't you? If you're not looking, if you're going to think that intimacy is opening up and talking about all your deepest feelings, then you're going to miss the way that men many times express their intimacy.
Sure.
So we have to look at. We have to avoid feminizing what we think intimacy is, and be open to the different ways. And it might be silence. Okay, so men sitting together in silence might be a way of expressing intimacy. Okay, it isn't necessarily going to look the same way to the way that women do it. But and then some men will open up and talk about their vulnerability, their emotions, and so on as well. But we need to be open to the different ways in which men express themselves.
Yes, which is refreshing to hear from somebody in your field. It's great, that maybe that isn't the path, encouraging men to open up. One of the main difficulties that I notice in the guys that I work with, and what I've been reading about lately, is the confusion of what partners want in their relationship. So you will classically hear a woman say, I want my partner to be more open and vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
When those behaviours are displayed, sometimes they're not very welcome, and most women, their complaints are about non-masculine traits in their men.
Yeah.
They've got no get up and go. They're not competitive. They don't lead. They don't take responsibility. And these are all what you could define as masculine traits.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit confusing in that area.
Yeah.
And one guy texted me today, actually, he listened to the podcast from the other day. He was like, it was so interesting to hear about you talk about how a woman might want vulnerability, but when you show it, she's like, the thing I found attractive about you was your strength, not your fucking vulnerability.
So it's very mixed messages, isn't it?
Sure.
And I think men are really good at kind of picking this up. That I think there was like a famous kind of Friends episode where Rachel was wanting vulnerability, but then when she got up from her partner, she was like really repulsed.
Oh, Bruce Willis, I think that was.
Could have been Bruce Willis.
Yeah, because he was just, he cried once and he couldn't stop crying. Yeah.
That's
and
right.
She was like, eventually she was like, would you just fucking stop crying and get on with it?
That's right.
Yeah. And that happens in, not in such a comical way, but I've experienced that.
Right.
Sure.
So you've been told to open up and then you've been slapped in the face when you have opened up.
Yeah,
Right.
it's not been, or it makes the other person very. I mean, it's difficult to listen to your man be vulnerable and show all his weaknesses.
Yeah.
Because, like I say, one of the things that in my relationships anyway, and maybe this is the people that I'm attracting, the thing they do like is the masculinity, the old-fashioned kind of stand up, get things done, stay in shape, be disciplined. A lot of people are drawn to that.
Yeah.
And if you show that there's flaws in that,
Mm-hmm.
it can be quite, it's like when you first start dating and you suddenly realise someone's flaws. It's like, whoa, I thought you were fucking perfect.
Yeah.
And now you've got all these flaws. It's like, how do I come to terms with that?
Yeah, so you can fall off the pedestal of masculinity.
Yeah, well, I think we're good at that at relationships. We always put people on and I think men do it more to women. They adore their woman. And then, like I say, when they're flawed or they become so attached that their whole happiness depends on her. And that's a dangerous position to be.
Yeah, relationships are very fraught.
Well, men kill themselves over relationships.
They do,
heartache.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you deal with heartache as a man?
Yeah, I mean, men are oftentimes kind of like hit on the head by, they're drawn into a relationship, and when it goes wrong, then they have all these emotions. They can be really intense, and then what do they do with that? So that's really difficult. Like if you can't open up. How do you express that? If you're, say, particularly for men, their partner, because many times as men get older, they have fewer and fewer kind of friendships as they might move cities.
Yeah.
They've moved away from university or whatever, to the point where, it really focuses down to, men not having that kind of support that women take for granted. So then it might be that, they might rely on their partner for all of their kind of emotional needs. Now, if that breaks down, that's their entire kind of support network. And that's, that could be a real shock for men to not have, not have that support. And then all the stuff we've been talking about where, it's not necessarily safe to open up. Who do they turn to? Maybe they might go to the doctor who might not be interested. Their friends might not be interested. They don't want to hear it. Or people have difficulties, as you were saying, that kind of, being vulnerable and being masculine is a contradiction. So people might not want you to be vulnerable, for example, given the way you look and you've got, the outside signs of masculinity. It doesn't kind of, it kind of jars, doesn't it? So where do you turn to?
Yeah, and I look back and I've done a lot of work on myself, and I know some of that is armor, the muscles, the tattoos, and I kind of look back and know that I've given off that vibe and message, and then I wonder why people say I'm intimidating. Makes me laugh because I don't feel intimidating inside, but as a visual, I guess I could be deemed as that. But yeah, and I think, can you imagine the devastation if a man works for years and years and opens up and does become vulnerable, and let's just say that relationship doesn't pan out, or there's let's just say he's cheated on her, or whatever goes wrong in the relationship after spending so many years trying to open up and be vulnerable, you could see why he would crawl back to his shell and never want to experience that. So I'm like, well, how much vulnerability is unhealthy? You know, how should you always keep your defense up to a certain point so that you're protected and safe? You know, do you really want to go all in with one person? Do you really want to give them everything attached? And I don't know the answer here, by the way, because I'm 38 and single, so I'm no fucking relationship expert. But I can see how on a pendulum, for me, there's a sweet spot in the middle, you know, of not being too vulnerable, because you could argue it's not an attractive quality. You could really argue that, and especially over a prolonged period of time, and then you could swing the other way and go, this guy is just emotionally dead, doesn't give me anything. Yeah. So maybe, like most answers, there's a sweet spot in the middle where that is. I don't know what you think, but perhaps that's the best place to be. Yeah.
I haven't heard that sort of construction before. I mean, it sounds very interesting.
This is where you're the Alex. Shut the fuck up. You don't know what you're on about.
But I mean, just taking vulnerability on its own, because I know that's the thing with men, is that they feel like they're going to have to guard this vulnerability. You know, they've got to build a wall around it and protect it because you know, it's not safe. But then the other flip side of that is that, you know, your vulnerability is your strength. It's where kind of everything is. It's where all the creativity, all the juices for life are. It's where you can, by being with your vulnerability, then, or working with your vulnerability, it's kind of where it's at, you know, in another way. So it's, you know, working with clients and the thing that men want to do is they want to kind of like just, you know, they want to kind of avoid it, lock it away, put it, you know, there's a compartment in their head somewhere they put all that stuff, and just kind of get on with life. But the thing is, you're kind of like locking away a part of yourself. You're kind of like, by doing that, by, you know, sort of locking that in a box somewhere, we're losing part of you, Alex. Okay. And so my work as a therapist is to make it okay to make it safe to be vulnerable in the therapy relationship. Okay, to start integrating those bits of yourself again. So you're right. I mean, it might not be stuff that you do with your relationship. Maybe you have to be. It's not safe in your relationship to be that vulnerable. But is there somebody in your life that you can be more vulnerable with? Okay, it might not be your partner. Maybe it's your best friend. Maybe, you know, often men talk about bromances where it's like a higher level of a friendship where, you know, they can just say anything. So I don't know whether if you consider that you have a bromance with anybody in that sense. Like, so it's like you've got nothing. You don't have to hold anything back. Is there?
Sure.
Do you have someone?
Yeah, and by the way, I agree with everything you said. I understand about, you know, the integration of all these parts of us and how it's very useful, and to lock and to put these parts where we can't see them is not healthy. You know, I get that. I also could argue that it's not healthy to have it locked up for 20 years and then just open the box and throw it all out.
No, you're right.
Yeah. So yes, I do. I have my company, The Better Man, which, although I'm the leader of it, allows me what I need too, which is the ability to, guys, I'm struggling with this. And that feels very normal now because we all share that information. It's quite a normal kind of culture within the group but whether you really go down to the darkest depths of what you're really scared of, you know, I think it's still very easy to flirt around with surface level problems.
I think maybe you have to, trust yourself with that, because obviously I work with men over many, many years, and we sort of like go down the different depths when they're ready to go down to those depths and work with it there. So it's safe because I'm not forcing them to do it quickly. They go at their own pace. They volunteer what they want to talk about. And when it's just when they feel safe, they'll get into those depths. But the thing about that is, what I notice is by talking about those things, it kind of brings them to life. Okay, so you know that what they might be really enraged about, it kind of like starts to, by talking it through in therapy, it starts to change their life. They start to kind of be able to sort of connect in other relationships, what they've been able to connect with me. So my relationship with them is a way for them to kind of experiment in a safe way to and then to take it out into the real world, if you see what I mean.
I do.
So what happens in the room with me, they can learn from, and they can try it out there as well.
Yeah, for sure.
So it sort of translates. So so I see evidence all the time that vulnerability, staying with the vulnerability and not, staying with it, what I call the icky stuff or the hard stuff, it leads to change over time.
For sure. And somebody who's been through psychotherapy for years and benefited from it. But I still would stick with my original kind of statement of there's a certain amount of vulnerability that you need, but surely maybe too much.
Yeah.
Like so much vulnerability is needed.
Yeah.
But how much is too much?
Yeah.
Of anything, right? Good traits, bad traits. So I would still kind of like look at that skill of like, well, yeah, how vulnerable do I be? Especially in a world where it's not necessarily rewarded.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, if we look at the hierarchical system here, like, in anywhere really, usually the strongest survive and they get to the top. And how they do it is not always morally or ethically correct, but you know what I'm saying, the strivers, the get-goers will climb the ladder. And that behavior is rewarded, especially in the masculine world, the biggest and the strongest survive, and you make sure you're one of them. So there's that competition to deal with. Yeah. So there's that part where men do want to have some status. They don't want to be at the bottom of the barrel. And I get that, right?
Yeah.
So it's balancing all these plates. How do I be that guy who's successful in life and reaching his potential and experiencing the joys of the world, and then train myself to be this vulnerable, open, compassionate human being.
Yeah. And it might be that I think you're right, and it goes back to what I'm saying, that out there in the real world it might not be possible to be vulnerable, but if you can find that safe place to be vulnerable, and often when we talk to men, in our research, it's they found that vulnerable place with a therapist where they could say anything, they weren't judged, they were kind of listened to, and this is a tonic. Okay, so they found if you find someone trustworthy, it doesn't have to be a therapist. It might be, somebody else. It might be a woman, or it might be a best male friend. So I've got a bromance, and we can talk about anything, and it's fantastic, completely non-sexual, but it's different to a friendship because you can. There's nothing you can't say.
Was that organic, or did you go out and look for that?
No, it's happened organically.
Yeah.
So I was just lucky, and I'm not the only one. I mean, a lot of men don't like the idea of bromance. You can call it what you like. A good friendship.
I think guys love the idea of bromance. I think that one of the saddest things is that loneliness things. I think guys would love bromance. I sit there and and think about how amazing it would be to have an older brother, someone to guide me, to confide in. And then you look around. Well, I haven't got an older brother. I haven't got uncles or cousins. I've just got my mum, my dad, and my sister. So I see that search for men in that bromance, or that soldier to kind of travel with. And you hear a lot of army guys talk about this brilliantly. They're like, I would die for my brothers. This is what they say, and because I know he would die for me, I would die for him. We are tight, and they have that. And I think that's one of the struggles when they come out of the army, right, or the military. It's like, where's my brotherhood? So I truly understand it, having been involved in men's circles too. And men's circles, the key to being in a men's circles is just shut the fuck up and let somebody speak. Yeah, it's so empowering. And then when it's your turn, you're like, they're listening to me. Oh my God, this is rare. They're not going to interrupt me because it's one of the rules. They're not going to challenge me. They're not going to attack me. Yeah, so powerful.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Even online, mate. I mean, is a men's circle is in person?
No, we do it in person. The circle, for sure. Yeah. It's online is the glue that holds us together, but nothing beats being in the. This is why I only do the podcast now in house. So the conversation me and you are having for me feels very different to if me and you were on Zoom. It's very different. I want to be in the room with you. I want to shut the door and I want to speak with you. Yeah. I love that. So how did the bromance form, and what does it look like? What are the rules?
So it just formed. Fellow academic, male academic, similar level, similar area, and I won't name. I won't name him in case
you might be wanting to shout out. But yeah, okay, that's cool.
But and he and his wife came to London to stay for a few months, and we got close that way. So we'd catch up every day, and that was like 10 years ago. And now we just kind of like meet up on holidays and things, and so it's like a travel husband in that way. And we can just say anything without any judgment or anything that you feel is okay.
Okay.
So if you can find someone like that.
So you have just a rule between you, like
nothing leaves. This is just
nothing's off.
Nothing's off the agenda.
Okay.
It feels like we kind of process a lot, and we like hanging out with each other as well.
Cool. And you can call this guy at any point and say, I'm struggling, I've got this issue.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. What are the good qualities of a good bromance partner then?
Safety. Yeah, you feel safe with them.
Okay.
You have a bond, a connection, and you just know that you can trust this person. So all the kinds of things that you really need to be able to say, and you're not going to be judged as well. It's really important. So these are all the qualities I think that.
Okay.
And nothing you say is going to be out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a place for matchmaking?
I think that's an interesting idea.
I
don't know. Yeah, I don't know whether. Yeah, how do you? Because like relationships are quite hard, aren't they? Because to develop. So this developed over, over a decade. So how do you develop that trust over time and so on?
Well, with men it does take time. Well, with any relationship it takes time.
Yeah.
But I guess it has to start at some point if you want it to grow, right?
Yeah.
Maybe there are services that could be provided where you hook up bromances. I mean, it's kind of what I do
like
in
an
the
app
better
or something.
Man. Yeah, just like this guy's interested in personal development and getting fit. Like here's your new training partner, and you go for a coffee after you've been to the gym. I mean, it happens in other. If you think there's little groups set up, men's groups where they talk and go for a walk and stuff. So it does happen. And but again, it's the conversation that I had with the guys from Mind. It's how do you get people to step over the line and start doing those things and looking for those things. And we were talking about the real difficulty of getting to the men in the middle. So you've got your men who are flying in life, you've got your people in the middle, not so happy, but it's okay. And then you've got your crisis end. Yeah. Crisis end usually move, right? They usually get on the phone and say, I can't take this any longer, or they transform, or they kill themselves, or they do something. Mm-hmm. Whereas your men in the middle kind of like don't really need to move. The pain's not so great. Yeah. It's there, but it's it's life, isn't it?
It's familiar, yeah. So I don't know the answer for that, because also like being lonely is stigmatized, isn't it? So, how do you get men to identify with, this thing that they need? If kind of like, but thing about men also is if they're not doing so well in life, then they start to feel like they've fallen behind, they're failing. There's a lot of shame around, not doing so well. If they compare themselves to other men who seem to be doing better, there's all that, all those feelings of shame, and they've failed as a man. So how do you connect with that when that's gone down? That will be underground. They're not telling everybody I failed as a man. They're just feeling that way, and they're like looking around and they're keeping it inside. Mm-hmm.
What do you think failure looks like as a man for you?
Well, failure is a thing, isn't it? It's when people start to compare themselves. I think that's the death of all kind of joy.
But totally normal. Is it though? Because if I compare myself to a guy who's turned his life around, so there's inspiration, there's comparison. I'm like, well, what's the difference? Yeah. You look at the guy who's got everything. Well, what an inspiration to me. Actually, he's got everything and I've got nothing. So comparison for me can be a good thing,
Can it be a bad thing?
For sure. Yeah. So it's but this is what I'm saying. It's like I think comparison is not something we can take out of the human being. So this is where I get a bit stuck. It's like it's not healthy to compare, but we're going to. Yeah. So maybe it's smart about who we compare ourselves to. Jordan Peterson would always say, "Look, compare yourself to you yesterday. Mm-hmm. Try and do the extra minute, because." Yeah, I mean, so let's go back to that then about the failure thing. What would define, if I said to you, are you a failure, Damien? And you said yes. What do you think would have to be going on inside of you in your life for you to deem yourself a failure? So what if you can't pay your bills?
Yeah, I mean, it's identify with failure. It's hard for me to sort of like to sort of take that example, because maybe if I thought about failure, it would be I'm failing against myself, my own kind of standards, my own kind of like ethics, my own morality in some way. So yeah, I mean, but I'm not, so for example, I'm not in a relationship, but does that make me a failure? No. Because do I really want a relationship right now? Is it the thing that's going to make me happy or happier? So and I think the answer is no. So I can't say it's a failing.
What are these standards that you speak of then that you would define maybe going against your personal standards as a failure?
Well, yeah, like so my standards are as a say as a therapist, if I wasn't helping my clients, if I was failing, if I wasn't able to in my work, which I really so I really enjoy being a therapist, and I really enjoy being a professor. I like doing research, so I like helping students to succeed and all. If I wasn't able to do those sorts of things, then maybe I'd feel like a failure.
Okay.
If I wasn't working in an ethical way, so ethics, morality seems to be really, I think because I was brought up in a kind of like a Catholic family without really realize, they didn't go to church, so I didn't really realize they were Catholic, but they had those kind of values, so I think I sort of absorbed the idea of right and wrong, which became important to me. So doing the right thing by people, those sorts of things, helping people, if I was a politician, trying to stop the boats, for example, that would be that would be against my ethics, so then I'd see myself as failing, I think. If I ended up being a Tory politician in that way. I hope I'm not I'm probably like sort of like annoying half of your listeners here.
Fuck off, don't worry about it. No, we're here to have good conversations like this. You've touched on something really important, I think, about so I'm just thinking about the same question I asked you, what would deem me a failure? There's definitely an internal standard that I've set myself, and where that standard comes from, I don't know. But effort for me is a good thing. I don't know if you've ever had this feeling of like you're not living the best life you could live. You just know that about yourself, and you're not trying to live the best life. So you kind of go to bed with yourself, kind of knowing you haven't given your all. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of reward in that, even if you fail. Even if that business doesn't work, even if that relationship doesn't work, there's something about being able to look at yourself in the mirror and go, I tried today, I did what I would consider the right thing, the courageous thing, the morally right thing, ethically right thing. And I look at myself sometimes and I kind of just know when I've got to the end of the day and those things haven't been there, I don't like who I am then.
Really?
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. And that would lead me to feel like a failure. I've spent even little things down to I've wasted 2 hours on my phone today. I don't like that life. Yeah. And therefore I don't like the person who leads it.
Okay. So for me, what I would be, if I waste, if I wasted a day, I think to myself. So I start kind of talking to myself. And this is my having, my own kind of therapist in me, which is, how if you don't have a wasted day, or if you don't have unproductive days, then how do you know what a productive day is? Do I always have to be productive? So I'm always trying to be like kind to myself, which I picked up from having, a therapist who really sort of embodied kindness, I think. And so a male therapist who I've kind of, because what we hope as a therapist is that you internalize the voice of the which is a kinder, nicer kind of voice to you, so more kind of constructive. So for me, by beating myself up or giving myself a hard time, I know it's not going to lead to anything. It's not going to lead to more productivity. It's just going to lead to me feeling shit. So I would always tell myself. So if I was in that state, I'd tell myself, well, today it's just a day. It's just it's not that important.
No, I get it, and I agree and disagree in equal measures. So
That's
I
what
agree to the point that, like, well, firstly, I'm not very good at that, and it's something I need to improve. This self-compassion, you know, I'm quite compassionate with other people. Myself, no.
Right.
You're right. A day of, you know, wasted a day is not that big a deal. But like, okay, so you waste 2 days, 3, 7, 14, 21, 365. 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. At some point, like that sweet spot we spoke about, you've got to go, no, this isn't good enough anymore. This isn't making me, this isn't allowing me to live the life that I want. This isn't allowing me to like myself because I respect people that try hard. So I think there's always that sweet spot where it's like the tough love coexists in the compassion. Yeah. You know, and tough love can be a form of compassion, you know.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Because the people who I really respect will tell me straight because they love me. You know, it's difficult with parents and such. They almost love you so much that they don't want to hurt your feelings. So you carry on, son, you know, you do what you're doing. Like, we love you regardless. Whereas a mentor or a good coach, they really care for you, but they're not going to let you hide for too many days. Yeah. You know, because there's a danger that we can keep people there.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's about being compassionate in a kind way to yourself, and so rather than beating yourself up that you should be doing this or doing that, you know, what is the kindest way of getting you to you know, to do something, not to be there for 365 days. But my argument is that you know, being kind to yourself, you're not going to be kind of sat there for 365 days.
Right. Okay.
It's the beating yourself up that kind of shrivels you, that pushes you down. Okay. By being self-compassion, you can, you know, you open up. You're more likely to kind of open up about something. You know, to be more open to doing something.
Yeah, that makes sense. Where does someone start then, Damien? If they've had a history of just kind of wanting to be better than they are and beating themselves up for not being that person, and let's say their self-compassion is virtually zero, where does somebody start if life really isn't good for them? Their motivation is on the floor, and they're not moving. Where would you start?
Well, I mean, there's a very simple technique that is often recommended, and that is, you know, if someone is really beating themselves up and they're useless, you know, they feel like they're useless and they've got nothing. Well, every night before you go to bed, I want you to list 3 things that were good about today. Okay, so if I ask you now, what are the 3 things that were good about today?
Oh, that'd be easy for me. I've had 3 podcasts with 3 awesome people, so
okay, fantastic. So
and the day's not even over.
So okay, what you're doing by doing this, you're beginning to kind of like challenge this kind of like I'm terrible, every day is terrible, and beating yourself up about it. You start to kind of like retrain your brain, because the brain is very good at focusing on the negative. It's almost in an evolutionary way, we've had to really focus on the dangers, the things that are bad. It's much harder for us to focus on what's good, or what's been good, what's been positive. I'm like this. I mean, I tend to focus on, so at the moment I'm kind of focused on, you know, the climate crisis, and I'm feeling, oh my God, it's like a catastrophe. Okay, it's very easy for me to become very stressed by all the fires in Europe and so on. So okay, I can go down that way of thinking, or I can start to kind of focus on, okay, but what's today? What are the good things about today? Sure. And begin to change my mind out of it, you know, to start to kind of shift my mind out of that mindset. So, and I think there are various kinds of meditation practices, you know, self-compassion practices that people can begin to, you know, to change the way that they see themselves.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think you can get apps and things. You can. Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely
have you ever tried them?
Yeah, and I've been recording 5 things each day for probably 7 or 8 years now.
Okay.
Yeah, which probably is kind of the magic's worn off a little bit. It can become autopilot, just write down. But I've started to find that if you go a level deeper after doing it for a while, it doesn't become external victories. So you don't go, I did a podcast. You find a characteristic about yourself that you've displayed. So you might have held the door open for someone. Do you know what I mean? Or you might have just sent an encouraging text message, or you might have displayed some courage, or whatever it is, and you look for that. And I always find that when you look for things continuously, you start to display and you find them more easily. Do you know what I mean? So if you look for courage every day, you'll start to display it more because you can see it.
Yeah.
And you get what you look for, right?
Yeah.
It's the same as the news with the fires. If you get the depression on the news and you watch it every day, it's what you get more of.
Yeah.
So there's so many different layers and skills and things you can do.
Yeah.
Feels like hard work, mind you. You know, just to function in at your what you might call near best.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the old Australian Prime Minister said once, Malcolm Fraser, life wasn't meant to be easy. I mean, this life is hard.
Sure.
Okay. It's a struggle, and everybody struggles. And sometimes I think it can be helpful for people to see that their suffering isn't unique. That every kind of suffering that we've had, someone else has had that before. Okay. Other people have dealt with that. They've struggled with that suffering before. So, we're kind of in many ways we are in the same boat with the climate change. We're in the same boat, aren't we? We're all facing this. It's quite easy to doom scroll. Yeah. So how do you look after yourself in that? How do you practice compassion for yourself in these circumstances?
So it sounds like you're edging towards personal responsibility too there. Like how can the individual start to parent themselves better?
Yeah, I don't know what you think of personal responsibility, but I think that, it's something that, in a way we only have control over ourselves, don't we? So,
sure.
You don't have control over other people. You might wish that they were doing things differently, but you actually don't have the ability to change
yes it. And again, on a political level, if you see some gaps in the way that your community is being run, so Jordan Peterson's argument would be, well, if you don't step into the gap and do something about it, then the gap's going to get bigger. So it's either kind of don't focus on it and don't complain about it, or step forward and try and solve the issues of the problem. Whether you start at the top level at society and you go, well, you want people to eat well, yet you're flooding supermarkets with affordable junk food. Like, you could start there, or you could start at the bottom and go, right, you're one individual person. Maybe we spend the next 12, 24 months getting yourself in order. So therefore you might be able to help your family out at a little bit of a higher level. And then maybe you can start to reach out in your community and you work from that way. This is a debate for me, because I've never been a political kind of guy, but I'm just starting to get interested in it because I think we're not helped as individuals. And I've always put the emphasis on the individual themselves. And I believe you have to start there. You have to have a look in the mirror. That's the only place you can start. But I think there are things that we can do at a higher level to make people's lives better. That's for sure in our communities.
What are you talking about?
So on an individual or societal?
Societal.
So even in terms of, like, I always like to start with what I think is the most kind of simple method. So let's talk about health and fitness, for example. I'm a huge believer that is a massive contributor towards mental health, and I have a strong belief that if everybody was more active in exercise, we would see some of these stats improve. They wouldn't evaporate, but they would improve. So like I say, if you have a look at what's affordable and the crap that's on the supermarket shelves, if you think from a political kind of messaging point, they never talk about health and fitness. They employ a health secretary that's terribly overweight, and she's not in that role anymore. But a terrible example to anyone. There's no inspirational leaders now in politics that we can look up to and go, well, this guy or girl seems really kind of stand up and trustworthy. So in definitely installing leaders like that kind of practice what they preach. We know what's good for us. We know being healthy is good for us. During COVID, why wasn't basic thing? Well, exercise was taken away from us. Same as vitamin D. I would start there in, making this accessible for everyone and incentivizing good behavior. I mean, this is how human behaviors work, right? If you incentivize people to get in good shape.
So free gym membership is your, how would you?
No, but okay, let's just say you're type 2 diabetic and it's under your control. Okay, well, we will fund your medication. Well, how about we challenge that a little bit?
How do you mean?
How about we don't fund the medication? So if you're type 2 diabetic and I said, Damien, you can sort this out by better nutrition and good health and moving your body, we might not have to fund this anymore. And mentally, physically, you're going to live a better life. But we're not going to support this medication for longer than 6 months. So you're going to have to do something in the next 6 months to try and improve your lifestyle.
Okay, so I kind of get what you're saying. It's a slippery slope in that this kind of neoliberal thing. The problem is of I don't know that word means in neoliberalism. Okay.
No, mate. No, I'm sorry. No.
It's the kind of that Thatcherite kind of like ideology that we should all be responsible for our health. Okay, we should all be entrepreneurs in a way, and we should all become, focused on our bodies and health. And at the same time, what we'll do is we'll just defund the health system like we're doing now. So we won't have an NHS that is sort of available to everybody. So the problem with that way of thinking is that you put more and more onto people to become obsessed with themselves, to be really focused on themselves, and become more atomized. So they're not connected to other people. Everyone's kind of too busy struggling to make ends meet, the cost of living crisis and and so on. And then what governments are actually doing, is they're defunding all the things that support us, all the things that could support us in our with our health and so on. So the structures, we whittle down the structures in society, and we say you're responsible for your own health, and that's it. Okay, so there's that the way of thinking can go too far. So I'm sort of like in the middle, always moderation in that. So I agree with part of your argument that we have to take responsibility for ourselves because there's no one else who's going to really do that. But at the same time, we need to have a really good health system. We don't want to have the American system where you're going to be bankrupted if you have your appendix out, for example. Okay, that you could lose your house or whatever if you have cancer.
Yeah, we don't want to. Yeah, but
but that's the alternative.
But what's one of the contributing factors towards cancer?
What's that?
What's one of the contributing causes towards cancer?
Diet is,
obesity.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, so let's just say there are individuals that really need the NHS's support, right? And rightly so. Everyone should, I believe everyone should have that right to be looked after and cared for. My argument would be if you're a 33-year-old guy who can move his ass and therefore take some of the pressure off the NHS for the people that actually really truly need it, then what contribution are you making to society? Could you make society better by taking care of yourself so that the NHS don't have to do it for you? So I'm talking about a 33-year-old guy here. I'm not talking about 70-year-old.
The trouble with that is that it's the ultra processed foods that are just where they're everywhere. Like is it like 70% of the food in supermarkets is ultra processed, and that's the stuff that's kind of contributing to cancer. So it's the structure. Like you have to start changing that. You have to make better food available. You have to limit the supply of this ultra processed food, which is no good at all for your body. Certainly it's been linked to cancer. Not only is it about personal responsibility, but it's also about making that a possibility for people. If you don't have that possibility to actually buy food that is the trouble with ultra processed food, it's so cheap, and then with the cost of living crisis, it might be all that people can afford.
Yeah, I get. I do understand your point, but that's not always. That's for a percentage of people, and rightly so. We look at those people and how can we help you? But still, there are a high percentage of individuals that could do better, and that could make England and the UK better. So, do I agree that we don't set it up for people to succeed in terms of course, it makes money, lots of money. But the same argument could be made in other areas, such as like pharma and stuff. It's like, do we really want people getting better? Do we really want people eating healthy? Like, that's going to be a big... do we want people to stop buying things? Consumerism down? Not really. That funds everything. Do we want farmers? Of course we do. It makes money. So I'm like, is there enough incentive for the people at the top to actually make these changes happen? Do companies start to miss out? Do they dissolve? For the greater good, do they go down? It's like it's a vicious kind of cycle from what I see, and the only way I can think is for me to help 30-odd guys take a little bit more personal responsibility because they're in a privileged position to be able to. So it's those guys I want to get. Like you can make a change. Some people can't. So it's those guys that I like to go after and kind of like give a little bit of like, come on, let's do our role for people that need our help, because the strong people are the ones that can help the people that really need it. That's how I've always seen it. Like we talk about hierarchy, there is a hierarchy. And this is why strong men, I think, should be encouraged, because we can help them. We can do something good, right?
Well, I think it's probably what is missing is this kind of narrative about strong men and the value of men in society. Because you have, as we began talking about at the start, this kind of narrative about toxic masculinity, which kind of tars all men with the same brush. And so, I would like to see more of that in a positive way. Let's talk about what it is that men are good at and how they, and you talked about, responsibility and helping other people, I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that because I've got myself in a better position, I'm now able to help 30 guys instead of 0. So I guess I'm biased because it's the path I've taken. Sometimes I can fall guilty of thinking my path is the path. Do you know what I mean? But I just know that I'm a better person for society, having gotten myself in order. My mum and dad are now living a much happier life because I'm a better son.
So what was critical to getting yourself in order?
Having a breakdown.
Right, so tell me, can you say something about that? You probably have told people.
Yeah, it's fine. I can tell you whatever. Yeah, but again, I was doing everything wrong. I had 0 self-discipline. I was cheating. I was doing all the things that. Just again looking in that mirror, going, I do not like who I am. For some reason, I kept digging, trying to get my way out of things, making things worse. Then started drinking. Then started eating crap. Then I'm 3 stone heavier. Then I've got no money because I can't work. And it's like, oh my god, you just want to escape yourself. So it was that crisis point for me. And I slowly had to build myself back up. It took several years.
How did you do that?
Well, like I said, I hit the bottom. I was like, well, I either kill myself now or I run off and escape, because that was my natural thing. It wasn't to kill myself; it was to escape.
Like where?
Anywhere.
Right.
Just where no one knew me. I was looking at properties in Scotland that had no neighbours.
Right.
Yeah, that was like 80 grand. I was going to get a dog and just live there. And I can laugh now, but that was, a real kind of like, I wanted to do that. So no one would know who I was. Then I joined, then I started to kind of slowly realise that I couldn't live my life like that. So I slowly started to at least want to get better, failed miserably, joined this mentoring program, set big goals, couldn't achieve any of them because I didn't have the discipline. So set even bigger goals. Right. Yeah, like you do, it's because I don't want it bad enough and all that stuff you tell yourself. And then I looked at myself and realised that I had absolutely 0 self-discipline. So if you said, Alex, set me a goal, I would write down the goal, and before I'd even put the pen down, I'd like, you're not going to do that. You haven't got the capacity to do that. You're not a disciplined man. So there was this tough love to it. So I was like, okay, well, what can I do? And I decided that I could have a shower every day. Yeah, I knew I could do that. And it was an effort, but I knew I could do it. And over 2 years, I just added something else on, like have a shower and go for a walk, have a shower and eat a piece of fruit.
So this is very good. This is what we call this behavioural activation. Okay, where even if you don't feel like it, okay, you've got to do that thing. Okay,
discipline. You mean?
Yeah. Well, it's your language is discipline, and I think that's a fine language to use. Yeah. But experts in the professional sort of, from the therapy point of view, would just say, well, that's behavioural activation. Just do it. Okay. So just the kind of just Nike, just do it. Yeah. Okay, and by doing it, it's somehow. What happened for you? I could say what I think it does, but how did it help you to? Well,
it helped me because I was able to get things done, and I slowly started to become a man that I could rely on and trust. Yeah. Because I couldn't before. And if you think these small things, the biggest test for somebody is to know where they're really at, their capacity, and what they're asking themselves to do. So I often see a lot of men overestimate their willpower and discipline, and don't realise how hard, like going to the gym every day. Dude, that's freaking hard. Yeah. Like if you're at the bottom of the barrel, like doing that, if you haven't been to the gym for 3 years, going to the gym every day is a real uphill challenge. Like, how about we just start with bump out 10 push-ups? So there was an element of it really humbled me. And without tearing myself down, I had to look and go, Alex, you're not capable of being that guy yet. So there was a real air of it brought me back down to earth and showed me what I was really capable of. It weren't very nice to look at. But slowly over time, I was like, now if I say I'm going to go to the gym, Damien, it's I'm going to the gym. That's what it's done for me. It's like I can trust myself now in 90% of areas. So that's what it's done. I actually go, okay, you're good at that. Before I didn't have any of that. Yeah.
And did anyone tell you to do this, or you just kind of worked it out yourself?
No, I worked it out myself. Right. Yeah, mainly. I set up the discipline project after that because I was like, discipline can change your life, So I worked it out myself. Paul Mort was a great help for me, who spoke at No Horse Bad. Yeah. But again, that was driven by motivation. So if you set goals when you're motivated, you can get a little bit carried away, I find.
Mhm.
You know, Paul pumps you up.
Mhm.
You're like flying high. You go, I'm going to make £1 million this year.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then you go away, and 2 weeks later you realise you're nowhere near skilled enough.
Mhm.
So there's a real grace in being humble to know where you're at, and
Mhm.
not, and kind of like tapping yourself on the back, regardless of how small you think it might be. I'm like, the fact that you got up on time today is not a small deal, and the reason it's a huge deal is because you said you would.
Mm.
So and because you've done it, that's what you've got to write down. You said you were going to do something, you did it.
Mm.
The worst thing I think a guy can do is say, I'm going to do that, and then do the exact opposite.
Mhm.
Because if you have a friend or a partner like that, after a while you go, I don't fucking trust you anymore. Get out of here, man.
Mhm.
Imagine that.
Mm.
Imagine your partner go, you know, I'm going to start this diet Monday. Brilliant. I fully support you.
Mm.
The next day, oh, I didn't do it yesterday. I'll start it today. Cool, let's go. Doesn't do it. The next day doesn't. Eventually you go, oh, they're full of shit.
Mm.
And we do that to ourselves all the time.
Mm.
So I was like, I'm going to get good at that. And that's the only thing I got good at. And it's still the only thing I'm really good at.
Mm. But it seems to have made a big difference.
It has. It's also exposed me to other areas now that need work. You know the self. It's like it's a lifetime's worth of work, right? So I swung too far the opposite way and became super disciplined, super regimented. Kind of created a bit of a prison for my habits and routines. Became super tough then because I was like this wimpy kid.
Mm-hmm.
You know. Then I swung across to this other guy who was doing SAS weekends and crazy shit. And I was like, I'm going to become tough as fuck. So then it's learning as an adult how to survive in the middle, where you can be a bit open and vulnerable and, you know, emotional and show how you feel and function in a relationship versus still having the strength to cope with life's challenges, which you need. Otherwise, you're going to be in big trouble.
Yeah. But I think that, I think you're right. It's the moderation is really important. It's not swinging too far in any direction of, you know, not too far in the direction of personal responsibility or not too far in the direction of the state should give me everything that I need. There's something in the middle. I think moderation seems to be something I talk to my clients about a lot.
Okay.
Because I think anything extreme, from my observations, it doesn't work out.
Where do you think we are on that pendulum now? Do you think we're too far swinging towards lack of personal responsibility, or do you think we've?
Who's it by we? Who do you?
Oh, okay, let me ask your opinion. Do you think society as a whole don't show enough self-responsibility, or do you think that we should focus all our energies more on the higher powers that make the decisions that allow people better opportunities?
I think and this is way out of my expertise level. So disregard, what I'm saying here because I'm a.
It's your opinion, right?
Yeah, it's just my opinion. But I think that the UK is in such in such a state right now where people are pulling out their own teeth.
Mm-hmm.
They can't see a GP.
Mm-hmm.
The cost of living crisis is at like 25% of kids are not getting enough food and so on. So I think we're in a terrible state. We obviously need to do something at that end of the political end. Because this I'm from Australia. I've never seen anything like it. Like I went back to Australia in December, and it was odd to be in a functioning democracy. Like you're walking down the street and you see like GP signs are out, trying to get patients to come in. We're open, come in and see us. Yeah. Here I can't get a GP appointment at my GP surgery. Yeah. There's just no way I can get one. I'd have to go private to get a service. So I think we're in a terrible state. So we have to do something at that end, obviously. And then at the personal responsibility side, well, I mean, you're the expert. You're more an expert on this way of thinking than I am.
Well, I can only tell you what's worked for me to a certain level, because you lose faith in government and politics. So therefore, I could easily sit around and go, well, the government aren't going to help me. Yeah. And they're probably not. Right, well, I've seen no evidence of that. And like you say, actually things have gotten a lot worse. Yeah. So you're like, okay, what can I do? Well, I don't want to get ill, because if I get ill, I could be in trouble here. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take care of myself. Yeah. Yeah. And my family first.
Yeah. And that is like where, without trying to sort of sound like a, really right wing, it's kind of like, where clients eventually get to is that this kind of realization after years of seeing me as a therapist that yes, they may have problems with their boss or their partner or whatever, but they only have they've only got control of themselves. That they're only able to change themselves. They can't change these other people in their lives. So in a sense, you know, there is this kind of the penny drops or a point where they realize that they have to, if they want something to change, which is why people come to therapy. You know, they're unhappy with their lives, things aren't going well, their relationships aren't working, whatever it is. They're the only ones who can do something about it, because no one else is going to come into your life and say, hang on a minute, I'm going to fix this all for you. It just doesn't happen, does it? So,
no.
So in a way, I agree with you. I agree that something has to happen at the political end as well of the spectrum. Something needs to happen at the personal end of the spectrum.
Okay. Just so you know, there's nothing right wing sounding about you, so I wouldn't worry about appearing ultra right wing after with that comment. But that's a great example. I didn't really think of therapy as good self responsibility. It's reaching out for help and saying, you know, I'm ready to do the work. I mean, we could argue you still need someone on the end of that as a therapist to guide you through that. But I mean, sure.
Yeah, it's you know, us men, and you know, I include myself in this. You know, we're quite good at blaming other people for things that are going wrong, and it's when we start to realize that actually you know, we've attracted things into our lives because we've attracted them into our lives for whatever reason. And the more, even if you don't in a way agree with it, the more responsibility that you can take on, the better for yourself, because it means that you know, you are more able to change things in your life to make things better. So
exactly. Let me give you an example. There's a guy called James who started with us. He was like, Alex, I want to set up my own business. We were like focused on him and his business for a while. That allowed him to help his wife get out of the career she didn't like and into the business. He got fit, he got healthy, he grew this business, worked incredibly hard. Now he's in a position where he's donating a lot of money to his local school because they're struggling with funds for equipment. But it's because he did that real vigorous route of personal responsibility. He's like, right, I can give back now, I can support. And there's various people like that. There's one guy who's kind of donating for human trafficking, which is like horrendously, like the stats in that are frightening. But he's done something similar. He's like, I'm in a position now, I'm strong enough, I'm courageous enough, I'm gonna set up this charity where people work under me and they do their bit in their communities, and together we can make a bigger difference. So I see the patterns of you, your family, your community, and I can see it running in that nice parallel line. And I'm like, that's a cool thing to encourage a guy to do, to like, well, let's make you so good that you can give back to people that really need it. And I like that emphasis.
And often we use it in therapy. We use that kind of metaphor where you have to put on your own, you got to help yourself, you got to put your own oxygen mask on it first before you can help somebody else.
For sure.
And that's you know, so
that cliche is true, right?
Yeah.
So Damien, in your line of work, what do you see most guys struggling with? If I just run through that list again, so relationship breakdowns, lack of close friends, loneliness, unable to open up, deprivation,
what do you mean by deprivation?
So I'm thinking more financial.
Yeah.
So let's just say financial stress, emotional illiteracy, changes to midlife. Like, do you have a common theme of like, oh yeah, most of the guys I see are struggling with this?
It's all those things. Definitely, they are all the really important things. You've got the list there. I don't know where you got the list from, but it's a really good list because that does cover things. You know, like it's middle-aged men who are most at risk for suicide. So we need to work more with those men. Often they're the men also who might be lonely as well. And struggling in all kinds of different ways, but I wish there was a bit more of an emphasis on middle-aged men, because you know they do have the highest rates of, they're the most at risk.
Okay, is that because of the most risk of all these things? Loneliness, not as many close friends, perhaps?
I did print it out I went to the ONS website just to see what it says about the middle-aged men. Yeah,
because do we use women as a blueprint? So do we say, well, women suffer with depression, anxiety too, yet they're not killing themselves? So we have a look at women. What do? Well, they go for coffee with their friends every week. They open up more. Do we look at women for a blueprint and go, well, they're leading the line pretty well, we should try and take a leaf out of their book? Is that a good strategy?
Well, but as you were saying, you know, they're more susceptible to self-harm. So it's like non-lethal kind of self-harm.
Is that just because men are more violent then?
that is part of it's part of it. Men are more violent and they use more violent means. So that's part of it. It's obviously just very, very complicated, isn't it? It's like there's not one thing.
I was hoping you'd have all the answers today, Damien. Because
I
don't.
Yeah, I mean, no one has the answers, and it's not just one thing. It's it's complicated, and there's various kind of factors. So when I looked at the middle-aged men, they're the ones who are most at risk. They're disabled, they've never worked or are in long-term unemployment, or they're single, or never been married, or never been in a civil partnership.
So can we go through that list again?
So yeah, it's men who are disabled, who have never worked or are in long-term unemployment. They're single, they've never been married or been in a civil partnership. So pointing back to that kind of idea of failure, I think this is when we've done research with men. So we've done research with men who have sort of gone to the brink of suicide, but for some reason they've stepped back, and their stories are really about lives going wrong. Like they compare themselves to other men, and they feel like they've failed, or they might have mental health issues, so they feel like they've failed, and they feel shame about their lives, and so there's all these kind of like kind of ways of thinking about themselves, which I think is important to understand with men. That back to this kind of competitive system, the comparison stuff, and coming out with the idea that they're failing. These can be part of the story about why men think about suicide.
Sure. So if we go through that list then, so disabled, so let's put that as limited mobility too, not in a relationship. Financial stress, did you say? No work?
Yeah, no work.
What was the second one?
Long-term unemployed.
Okay.
Yeah. So all of these things are critical.
Yeah. Which, if we kind of flip that, then they're the things that we should perhaps be looking to improve in our own lives, right? So healthy relationships, good health, so that we can be mobile. Because I read somewhere, I don't know if you've heard this stat, that a lot of most of depression comes from immobility, a lot of chronic pain, a lot of not being able to go outside.
Yep.
A bit like when lockdown, people started to lose their shit because they were trapped, and immobility can do that. It can give you that feeling. So do we think the answers are there then, of like, they're the things that we need to improve, they're the things that we need to work on, they're the things that we need to focus on? We need to get people in employment, we need to get people knowing and learning how to have healthy relationships, we need people to be fit, healthy and mobile. Is that the answer, if that's the main causes of what we believe is suicide?
These are the things that we should be focusing on. So we should be looking at men who are in financial distress, men who are single but are not happy being single. Some of us are happy to be single, but there are men who are obviously not happy to be single. They feel lonely. Maybe it's to do with, even if they are single, maybe it's about loneliness, and do they need a partner, or do they need a bromance, or do they need somebody that they can talk to? So I think loneliness, I think that's a huge issue for men.
I agree.
I don't know what the stats are on loneliness in men, but I know it's a very large number of men that will be listening to this are feeling alone.
Sure. And would you say the majority of them will be single? Because I know that people can feel lonely despite being part of a family, or I think I read that loneliness is pretty much the ability not to feel understood. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good not to be seen or to be understood. I think that's a pretty good definition. And obviously some people in a relationship are going to feel alone, because what happens in relationships that go wrong is there's kind of like an accumulation of things over time, where men might feel less appreciated in their relationship. There's not the spark, or they're not being seen in the way, or the partner's not seeing them, not listening to them. So these things can accumulate, and before there's kind of like the big bang of the breakup. Okay, so there's a growing kind of dissatisfaction, but also, like, men can be quite oblivious to their partner. If they're unhappy, they might not be picking up the signals that their partner's unhappy. So I don't know if that sort of makes sense as well.
It does make sense.
I think you're right, though. A relationship isn't necessarily the path to feeling connected and feeling
Okay, this is why I think a lot of, and let me use the word toxic masculinity, because it's just an easy kind of, people I think understand it now. I think it's doing well in the cultural world, like YouTube, you know, Andrew Tate's of the world, because what they're encouraging people to do is to be the kind of guy that is noticed, that does have status, that is going to keep a woman interested, that's thriving in life. And that's quite an appealing message now, especially for young men, you know, when life is so tough. And, you know, the idea of being at the top or having some status and working hard and attracting things into your life, I can see why that message is getting through. Like, what's your view on like the Andrew Tate message?
Well, I think you're right. I think it's unfortunate that we live in a world where the Andrew Tates of the world can kind of fill a gap, where, you know, men are maybe feeling you know, sort of misunderstood, feeling disconnected, feeling powerless, and then someone like Andrew Tate can come in and sort of fill that gap, where, you know, but then along with Andrew Tate comes all the kind of hatred of women and the sort of radicalization online, kind of like you know, sort of giving men messages that are unhelpful, the violence and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, this sort of online kind of misogyny, the threat is that it's going to come into the real world. So it could be a danger to, you know, these men could be sort of radicalized and become dangerous. So it's obviously the wrong thing. You know, we need people who are going to fill the gap, but in a much more positive way, that are going to help men, okay, to connect. And, you know, so that's my view. I don't know whether that.
Okay. Do you have anyone off the top of your head that you would consider a healthier role model for men?
Well, not in the not that you see in the media. So I mean, is that you? I mean, is it someone like what you guys do that?
I don't know about that. The Andrew Tate thing's interesting. If you don't mind hanging around this topic for a minute, what do you think would happen to the statistics? 6,000 suicides per year if people took on board his message more, so strived for better, were become more disciplined, aimed for status. Do you think it would have a negative impact or a positive?
Look, I mean, suicide is so complicated. It's hard to know what impact anything will have on suicide. It's hard to know what kind of suicide prevention programs have on suicide, and so we can't really, you know, we can't know that. My concern with Andrew Tate is that it's the negative, the kind of it's tinged with with the misogyny, and, you know, the allegations against him and so on. So he doesn't seem like a good bloke. But I see he's obviously filling a gap, isn't he?
He was apparently the most Googled man on the planet. What about Jordan Peterson?
Well, in academic circles, he's not taken seriously. He's sort of seen as what maybe I shouldn't say this, but what a stupid person's idea of a smart person. He's not, the stuff he comes out with is psychobabble. I mean, that's all I hear from Jordan Peterson. So
not a fan?
Not a fan at all. No.
Who are you a fan of?
Who am I a fan of?
We're saying Tate no, Peterson no.
Well, this is the thing. I think you've hit on a really good point. Is that I am concerned. Like, you know, like so for example, you see it like on Twitter and so on. You see the fights between the feminists and the men's rights activists and so on, and then you hear talk of toxic masculinity. I am very concerned that there is nothing there's no one that I can think of that is a positive role model. That I can, because I don't see Andrew Tate as being positive. I don't see Jordan Peterson as being positive. So I don't. I'm stumped. But I think that you know if there was and maybe that's a reflection also of wider society. That I think you touched upon is there's not these kind of positive role models for men. Maybe in past times we had this, but we don't seem to have this. We don't seem to have that kind of structure now. So are there positive role models that you?
Well, I would argue that Jordan Peterson could potentially be one, and I'd argue that is he better than the person that you're not? So if we can't find anyone to fill that gap, would a youngster or even any man actually, who's really miserable with their life, would they not gain something positive from following a Jordan Peterson? With that, yeah, it might not be, but it's like it's like in the political party. Like, I mean, you've got 2 parties, right? 3 maybe if you count the Liberal Democrats. Fucking hell, are they all just bad? Like, how do you pick from that? Whereas a Jordan Peterson for me would be like, yeah, okay, you might not agree with everything, but maybe some of his stuff could make your life better.
So, for example, what does he like? What?
Okay, so I like his argument of like, you know, the way that you carry yourself and the first thing that you do in the morning, make your bed and try and better yourself from who you were yesterday. I don't know how that's not a positive message. I see that as a good thing. And you could argue the same for Andrew Tate in his discipline area of like, dude, you're heartbroken, I know. Go to the gym, make yourself better, make yourself stronger. Like, put the focus on you. Don't try and attract loads of women. Like, try and be the best version of yourself so that you attract better people into your life. So, and maybe this is because I'm 38, I can pick out what I think is healthy and shove down what isn't. Whereas if you're a 13-year-old boy, you might not. You might idolise somebody and go, everything Andrew Tate says is gospel. Yeah. But a Jordan Peterson, like, again, you're more clued up than me on this kind of stuff. I don't know what would be harmful about his message.
It's just psychobabble. I mean,
yeah, but what does that mean?
It just means it's kind of like an example would be, you know, for example, when you go to TikTok, you know, they have everywhere you now go on TikTok, there's something about like narcissistic partners. Okay, so everything, you know, everything's interpreted as being you know, someone you don't like becomes, or someone you've had a breakup with has become a narcissistic partner. But that's a psychobabble, because narcissism is a particular kind of thing in psychology, which has particular kind of traits. Okay, it's a particular style of personality. So just because, you know, people are talking about this stuff, they're not necessarily talking about it in a way that we in academia would be talking about it. It doesn't make sense to label everybody you don't like a narcissist. Okay.
And does Jordan Peterson do that?
Well, he doesn't make sense. I don't.
Yeah, but you got to say more than that. You can't just say he doesn't make sense.
I mean, I have to say that I don't. You know, I avoid listening. I turn off when I hear him because it's not making. It's not.
Do you not think one of our flaws as humans is sometimes we just say, yeah, you know, fuck Andrew Tate, forget Jordan Peterson, they don't make sense, but we don't give them the time or the energy to look into them more or to. But
the flip side of that is what I would argue is that, yeah, they're going to say some things that are useful, but that's kind of what online recruitment is, isn't it? It's going to sort of hook you in, and then you're going to start getting into the crazy stuff, the sort of hating the women type side of their, you know, they're not particularly positive about women. These are, I'm putting it very mildly.
Sure. Andrew Tate, I don't know if JP is a woman hater.
I don't know. I try.
Well, nothing I've come across is, but you might have run in something that I haven't. But what I'm saying is, if we can't find any positive role models, is JP better than nothing? I would seriously consider yes.
I say no.
Really? So we can't just leave it at no. Where does somebody go to then?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a definite issue that you're pointing to, and I don't have an answer about. We should have more positive role models. You know, try and think of celebrities, for example. Are there any male celebrities that that are good role models?
Celebrities, no. I'm with you on that one. I can't think of a celebrity.
Yeah,
for sure. I can think of philosophers, authors, people like that, creatives. But celebrity-wise, I stay as far away from it as I can.
Yeah,
with all the wrong things sour with celebrities and Love Island and things like that, it's just horrendous.
Yeah. But it would be great if there was like a kind of a superstar academic who provided a you know, an alternative to Jordan Peterson or and the Andrew Tates of the world, because I think they're to me they're about recruiting people into a particular, you know, they sort of like hook you in with maybe some nuggets that make sense, but the whole package, no, it's not for me.
I'd say Jordan Peterson's made my life better.
Okay.
He's educated more. Even the way that he articulates himself, he's quite an intelligent man. I don't think you could argue that, right? Okay. The way he presents himself on stage, is confident. His bravery, his courage. Yeah. Despite everything he's been through, he still plows on. And I'm like, there's some good traits in that man. I think if more people followed Andrew Tate than Love Island, the world would be a better place.
Rather than Love Island,
so some reality TV or some junk or playing your computer. Okay, let's say most guys stop playing their computer, and I'm not just talking about boys. I'm talking about grown men sitting in their bedrooms playing their computer. Decided to pick up a JP book up instead. You wouldn't think that would be a better choice?
No. But we can agree to disagree on
Sure.
on this. I'd like to see much more positive male role models out there. And
That I can get on board with.
Yeah.
The fact that you'd think it would be better for someone to play the computer than listen to JP is quite...
definitely.
Wow.
Yeah.
What, the thing that destroys my brain and just keeps me inside, lonely, unable to make relationships, the computer, yeah.
Well, I mean, the computer is a good thing for many people. Yeah, not in moderate. If it's not in moderation, and you're you're not focused on relationships because you're a computer, then obviously that's an issue. But that's a different issue to Jordan Peterson.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I was comparing which one I think would be better.
Yeah. But we can agree to disagree.
For sure, yeah.
Well,
listen, if I had everyone that agreed with me, it'd be a
people agree with you on...
I think, again, I'd probably pick guests that maybe more in alignment with my... And one of the things I really want to challenge myself is, again, you're somebody I really respect, so I love it when you don't just go, and say this, because it really makes me think and expand. I love being challenged, because I certainly don't think I know it all. Yeah. I'm very aware that I have my way of doing things, and something that I'd love to do is to be expand my mind a little bit more. So I've been reading books by Bell Hooks.
Famous
feminist,
feminist,
because again, the old Alex would have been like, "Fuck that." I mean, I didn't like it at all, but I'm really glad I read it and I learned. And there's some really great stuff in there. Some of the stuff she says is superb, but the overriding message. I think she really overlooks biology and just laws of human nature. It's very idealistic for me, but it was great to read. Very challenging, because it's very easy to just watch JP content because I'm a JP fan.
Yeah, well, I encourage you to look beyond JP. And that's great that you read Bell Hooks. So yeah, a lot of us in academia will not be taking Jordan Peterson seriously, and see.
But isn't he included in academia? He's qualified. He's a qualified clinical psychologist, is he?
He's not. He's not an academic. He's kind of more of a celebrity kind of clinical psychologist, isn't he?
What would you call that? Sorry, you're gonna have to kind of like. I'm not clued up on this. When you say academic,
academic, would do research and publish, and he publishes books. I know, so they're kind of like the popular books and things, but it doesn't mean you've done the research. It doesn't mean that you're backing up your points. It doesn't mean that it's rigorous and scholarly.
Yeah. Okay. So you're an author, right?
Yeah. So I do research and I publish. And
what were the books?
Journal papers.
Okay. So
So that would be.
Yeah. What were they on?
So for example, how do people recover from depression? How do men deal with depression?
Yeah.
Suicide, how do men walk back from suicide, and so on. So all the stuff I've been talking to you about today is backed up by research. So that's... Is
there anything that really changed upon that research that you did? Is there anything that you stumbled across that changed your mind and your perspective on mental health? Did you learn things by doing the research papers?
Yeah, I think I did. I think that so, for example, when I first came to the UK from Australia, I went around the country and I talked to people about how they recovered from depression. And that really kind of opened up my eyes to just the very different ways in which people deal with depression, and how people have to find their own kind of path out of depression. And there's so many different stories and ways of doing it. So for example, I talked to one man who would have been in his 70s, and he told me when he's in the depths of depression, that's when he starts to feel the best, because he realizes he's hit rock bottom and the only way is up. Okay. So another woman who had to get a diagnosis of dyslexia. Whereas she thought that she was stupid, but it was this diagnosis of dyslexia that allowed her to see that actually she's not stupid. She's got a medical condition, and she was able to sort of work through her depression that way. So there are many different ways that people find out of their depression.
Have you ever been depressed?
After a relationship breakup, yeah.
Wow.
So, but that was probably more grief than depression. But both my parents suffered from depression, and they had quite severe depression. But what I did is I kind of put myself in therapy as soon as I could, and I think that really helped. So I haven't had the depression that my parents have, just the normal kind of grief after a relationship breakup. But that gave me a sense of, this is pretty bad.
Sure.
It gave me empathy for people
Okay.
with depression. It really, I think maybe before that I didn't have the empathy that I do now.
I think that's important in your job, isn't it? Obviously, that you felt that and you've experienced it. It's really interesting what you said there about like grief and depression, separate things, the same thing. It's interesting because there was a lady on, I can't remember her name now. I think she was a psychologist as well. And, I said, how do you know if someone's depressed? And she ran off this tick list. Mm-hmm. And I was like, and again, you might agree with her or not, I'm not sure on this, but she went through the tick list and I was like, well, I know this lad who's got all of those kind of symptoms that you've read out. And, it was like, he's been in bed for like 2 weeks, struggling to get out of bed for 3 weeks or whatever it is. All that kind of stuff. And I spoke to this lad who was suffering at the time because he just split up with his partner. It was a real tough time for him, and his partner had 2 kids, so it kind of felt like he'd lost the kids as well, so almost like a family. And he's really down. And I said to him, if she called you right now, do you think you'd be able to hop out of your bed and get the energy to go and see her? He's like, if she called me now, I'd be fucking fine. I'd be buzzing. I'd be healed. Mm-hmm. So I was like, well, I don't think that's depression. Mm-hmm. I think that might be heartache, grief, maybe you call it. Yeah. So it's really difficult to separate this, and to maybe, I don't know whether you think it's helpful to label or not, or just to sit with the feelings, but kind of he talked himself into the fact that he was depressed. I saw it as grief. Yeah. And if she can call you and make that okay, you're not depressed. It's the heartache that would be healed. Yeah.
So Freud famously in his work back in about 1917 made a distinction between grief and depression, where grief is, what the object of the grief is, you've lost something.
Right.
In depression, you don't know what you've lost.
Okay.
It's kind of unconscious.
Uh-huh.
You don't know what it is that's going on. In a way, depression's kind of like is the storm, but you don't know what's causing the storm. Okay. Is
there something always causing the storm? And should it be your job to find out? And I say your job as the individual, not the therapist.
As a therapist, this is controversial in that for many decades, there's been this kind of idea of a chemical imbalance, causing depression. Okay, yeah. What we now know is there's no kind of scientific evidence for that chemical imbalance. Okay. So that's really what we understand now, is that was kind of like a pharmaceutical story or narrative that was put out to make taking medication make sense for those who have depression. Okay, so if you've got a chemical imbalance, then you're going to think, oh, that's great. I can take the medication and balance my brain out and then I'll be fine. However, we don't really know how antidepressants work. And also, they don't work as well as we once thought. They compared to placebo, they're not as powerful maybe as we once thought. However, having said that, working with clients who take antidepressants, it can really help them. Okay, and it can be really useful to combine antidepressants and therapy. Because sometimes people are just too sick to do therapy. They're just not able to engage in it, and the antidepressants can help them to engage in the therapy. So the cause, it's controversial. We as psychotherapists do feel that there's something in there, there's something unconscious that we need to work through in order to understand the cycle of depression. If you come from that biological side, you think it's a chemical imbalance, although there's no evidence for that.
So where did that story come from? So who did the research to say to the farmers, here you go?
There's no.
It's not the academics, is it?
What's that?
It's not the academics, is it?
Well, I don't know. Yeah, there's not the evidence for it. So a recent review of studies by Joanna Moncrief and colleagues has found no evidence for that.
It's purely just a story, it's
a story, but sometimes stories are powerful.
For sure. I think often is the case. Yeah, it's just interesting to know where that stemmed from, because I've heard of things like pharmaceutical companies maybe paying research companies to do some research that they want. I just wondered if you thought that might be the case for that story, where that was born from. But yeah, it was the cliche. It's like depression is a chemical imbalance, and these medications will help you rebalance the scales. So I don't know where that kind of narrative came from. But at the same time, I don't want to diss antidepressants, because I've seen how they work, and also I've gone around the country and I've talked to people about their antidepressants.
and how huge a difference it can make. So somehow I think, maybe because like a placebo is powerful in itself, when you compare an antidepressant to a placebo, okay, there's not much difference. But actually, when you talk to patients, it can make a big difference to them. When
it's interesting. It covers a lot, though, doesn't it? If it is placebo. And same as exercise, apparently that has been as powerful as antidepressant medication. Is that right?
Yeah, so exercise,
if not more.
So I think exercise can be a really powerful way of dealing with depression, and I think antidepressants can work. There's a whole range of things that do work for depression. In a way, like as a therapist, it's hope. Like a placebo is hope, and that's one thing that I give patients as a psychotherapist is I give them hope. Well, I think we can work with that. And that's really important, I think, to say that, because patients will come in with no hope. They think that this is it. They're not going to get better. Life can't get better, but it does. Depression tends to lift. So the positive thing is that oftentimes even without help, it will get better.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm wondering so hope's not a strategy. Obviously, we need it.
We need hope.
Yeah, but we need strategy to think too.
People find their own, as I say, people find their own strategies for dealing with depression if they can. And exercise is a good one, but it's not exercise isn't everything. Some people do need therapy. They need to kind of explore.
Yeah, I don't think it's everything. I just think it's an important, integral part of mental health. I don't think the physical and the mental can be too separate.
No, you're right. I mean, your brain is physical, isn't it? Everything kind of stems from the biological and the physical.
I know from experience I've been at my best when I've supplemented training with therapy.
What kind of therapy?
I've done psychotherapy.
Okay.
I did that for probably 3 years.
And how did it help you?
It was one of those I would question. I was like, this guy's great, but I can't tell you why.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? He would never tell me what to do. He'd never give me guide. He would never give me direction and say, never give me opinion. But he had a real smart way of, we always would get down to the dark stuff, that shame aspect. And he was really good at that. So it's really difficult when someone asks me, how did he help? I don't know, he just did. But I think that safe space you take about.
What was he like? As a person, do you think?
Well, listen, he wore a card. He weren't like, he come on with his cardigan and he's like, he looked like he was some guy from the 70s or whatever. I really liked him, by the way.
Okay.
I think I should say that. I liked him. I liked his ability to go into the uncomfortable stuff.
You trusted him in that.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah,
for sure. I did. I don't really have a problem trusting therapists. It's in relationships that is the problem. Trusting my partner, I trust a therapist. I can tell a therapist most things. But partner-wise, it's a very different story.
Yeah.
I know my therapist can't hurt me. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, yeah.
I'll just sack you and move on to the next therapist. But my missus cheats on me. I'm that guy in bed.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I can't separate that. I give the individual too much power on that. And I'm like, please don't leave me. Please make me happy. My life's better with you in it. Don't go anywhere.
Yeah. So it sounds like what you're saying is that it's that positive relationship you can have with your therapist that is important. And it sounds like you liked him. You probably felt like he liked you.
He did like me. He told me at the end. He respected my my willingness to go into the uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I'd never miss sessions. I would be that. I was always on. I was that guy.
Yeah. So you wanted to do the work.
I find it fascinating.
Yeah.
Whether I really wanted to do the work is a different question.
Yeah.
Because there's how far do you go with this stuff? And again, I've been questioning that all the time, Damien. It's like, how many books do I read? Is this really helping me? Am I overanalyzing? Should I just live my life? Should I forget all this bullshit and just live? Maybe I'll be happier that way. All that kind of stuff comes across. And there's a good argument for that. Al Dovey talks about this, do we analyse too much? Especially when we're feeling like shit. Is that a good time to analyse your life? Some therapists would go, actually, yeah, it is, because that dark part is in front of you now.
Yeah.
Al Dovey might go, no, don't do it now.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
But it sounds like the positive relationship, the ability to kind of be with the shit, the crap, is important for you. So it sounds like that. Well, we often think the relationship's more important than the brand of the therapy, in terms of the healing that can happen, and that alliance that you develop with your therapist, and you can have that positive experience. So I think that sounds...
Well, it's interesting because about maybe 8 weeks ago I said, this will be our last session, Aidan. I said, we've been doing this for a few years now. I feel good. And I felt like shit the last 2 months. It's really interesting.
So what do you think happened?
I don't know. I don't know whether it's timing and just coincidence or the fact that I haven't got that 1 hour each week to talk about some of the things that I carry around with me.
Did you how long did you give yourself to once you said you were going to quit therapy, how long did you give
4
yourself?
weeks.
Right.
Because again, he was like, that's cool, but let's kind of work not our way out of it, but he had a strategy in place. He didn't want to just end it like that. Again, he kind of did all the right things.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
But still, you kind of left, aren't you?
Yes, there's a gap there for sure. There's a gap there for sure.
Do you miss?
Yeah, I do actually. Yeah. I think men are guilty of thinking, well, it's just talking now. I'm not doing anything. Well, actually, the talking is the thing that's the magic.
And the other thing maybe is this is a relationship. It's like you're broken up. So
romance partner is gone.
You're so no wonder you don't feel 100%. You're going through that transition, and maybe you feel kind of abandoned. And
my best mate has met someone.
Right.
I've lost him now for good.
Okay. So you're worried about... You're laughing, but...
Yeah, I am laughing, I guess. Yeah.
But are you worried about your relationship?
Things change, yeah, for sure. Things do change. I think as a 38-year-old guy, all my friends have moved on. They've all got family and partners and kids. In fact, none of my close friends are single anymore. Right. I'm the only one.
What's that like?
It sucks.
Yeah. So then, maybe that's also you've lost your therapist as well.
Can I have a therapy session now, Damien?
What's that?
You're not going to charge me for this, are you? Yeah. Again, but this is the compassion part. I don't sit and think about it like that. I would never sit and go, well, your mate, you haven't lost him, but he's met this girl now, and maybe less time with him. No therapist anymore. I won't kind of allow that into my world, unfortunately. I'd rather just work a bit harder.
Yeah. Well, us therapists will say, well, allow yourself to sit with that stuff. Allow yourself to acknowledge that this is a big change, isn't it?
What's next for you, Damien? What are you doing with yourself now in the next 12, 24 months? Do you have any projects, anything you'd really like to change in the world? What are you doing?
Gosh, well, yeah. I mean, so I'm. What am I doing? I'm going to continue seeing my clients. I'm going to continue with my research. Two things. One is, and this, I am really interested in online misogyny and researching this issue about
Andrew Tate.
And not Andrew Tate specifically, but also, how this kind of negative, the way that men are kind of drawn into. Say, I don't know, online kinds of, groups that are not good for them, that we'd call kind of misogyny. And how can we change that? What can we do about that? So that, how do you find, or how do you work with that sort of vulnerability that men might have, where they're going to be attracted into, online hate groups, for example. So this sort of online radicalization. So that's one thing that I'm interested in looking at. And then the other thing is fathers and distress. Given that, 10% of fathers go through awful anxiety and depression around the birth of their child, but the NHS isn't particularly set up at the moment to help those men. They kind of fly under the radar. It's more focused on the women. And the men tend to get left behind. So we want to do a project to change that.
Wow,
find out what's going on. And this is with Viren Swami at Anglia Ruskin, who would be leading it, and I'll be working with him. Should we get the funding? So we're hoping we'll get the funding. It's quite hard to get funding for men and mental health. But what we want to really do is to change the NHS in the long run so that men are taken into account. There are particular ways, where all the things that we've been talking about, that they may not be obviously distressed. They might be trying to hide it. They might be thinking, the focus should be on my wife. rather than me. That kind of, so there are all kinds of reasons why they fly under the radar. How do we train professionals to spot that? How do we help men to, how do we raise awareness that this is an issue so that men come forward? So that's
okay. Well, that's something we haven't touched on today, because in the relationship breakdown, it spoke about men who obviously, if they split up with their partner, it can often involve them not seeing their children anymore, and the laws around that. It can be in the approval of the mother, whether they get to see their children. And, should we be fighting for stronger laws around that too? Because there are some great dads out there who probably don't deserve to be banned from seeing their children.
Yeah.
And there was a link to that and suicide, where it's just like they can't deal with losing their partner and their children. It's quite hardship for a man, that.
Yeah. So I know various men who are sort of working in that area. It's not an area that that I work in, but I definitely hear you that's it's a real problem.
I'd never thought about it. I thought about the pain to be a dad who can't see their children.
Yeah.
So a bit of a traditional question on the better man. What is it that you feel like you need to work on in your own either business life, personal life, relationships, in order to become what you would consider a better man?
Better man. How can I be a better man? I mean, in many different ways. So I'm trying to think of. I'm trying to pull one example. Choosing the right partner. So I think so. For example. I'm quite happy being single now, because I've come out of a 10-year relationship, but I realize I need to kind of choose the right kind of partner who I don't know, like maybe I can be bad at choosing partners. Well, you sort of know, in a way, you sort of you sort of know what they're like, but you kind of deny it. It's all the love and everything, isn't it, that can kind of get in the way of. It's like rose-colored glasses.
Is love overrated? Do you think you should pick more with your head?
I don't know if it's your head, but I think you should trust your gut.
Okay.
I think maybe but I think the thing is, there's lots of signals and things that you're getting all kinds of confusing signals and so on. So maybe it's about choosing the right person, or just being happy being single. And
okay.
Do
you think you can give therapy to a man who's an alcoholic who's drunk at the time of therapy? So let's just say an alcoholic walks in, right, and he's drinking a bottle. You could go, do you know what? Whatever we have in this conversation, it's just not going to go in, right? I read in a book once that being in love is something similar. It's like it's the closest you can get to being possessed. Like logic goes out the window. You're like, if that was my friend, I'd be like, mate, this relationship is not good for you. It's harming you. It's harming the other person. But when you're in it, it's like, but I love this person. Yeah.
And I think the thing is with love is like, you put yourself in a room with 10 people and you're going to fall in love with the kind of the familiar one in a way, what you've had before.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Which is often kind of
the wrong one.
Because we learn how to love from our parents, don't we? So we learn what's familiar from our parents about what love is. So, but I don't think it's a bad thing, because it allows you to rework through those earlier kind of. So, as a therapist, I say it's a good thing, because it allows you to work through what you're trying to find is a better outcome. Okay, so you're attracted to, until you sort of work through those issues, you're going to be attracted to that kind of person. Does that? I don't know if that rings a bell.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those footprint years are pretty important, right?
Yeah. So it's not to be like So I learn from my relationships, and I don't beat myself up about them. I don't necessarily need to rush into another one, go through that again. If you just come out of a 10-year one, you might need a couple of years to kind of process, I think. That's...
This name's just popped into my head. Do you know much about Robert Greene?
God, no, I don't.
Okay. He did Laws of Nature, Mastery, Power. That was banned in federal prisons in America. That's an interesting guy you might want to read. I'll send you a link.
Okay.
In fact, I'll send you the book. If you're enjoying reading at the minute.
Yeah, send me a book or a link.
Cool. Do you enjoy that conversation?
Yeah, this has been great. I didn't know where this conversation would go.
There's people come on and go, what are we talking about, Alex? And
but I also enjoy that you allowed us to have difference of opinion.
Of course.
And that we got to explore things where we see things differently. Because I think this is what has to happen, is that we need to talk to people who we don't agree with necessarily. I think this is the way forward.
Oh, absolutely. There's too much of that going on in the world, Damien, where like some people would have gone, "What, you don't like Jordan Peterson? Get the fuck out of here. We're not. We can't." And I'm like, it's ridiculous. It's like, you've got to remain humble and open willing to be able to listen. So I really, really enjoyed that conversation. It was challenging, of course, but they're the best conversations. So you're a guy I respect. I'm always going to listen to your opinion, whether I agree or not. That's irrelevant. It's the respect to listen to somebody and understand that you might not know everything, believe it or not. So I think that's really cool.
And I'll actually go away and read more about Jordan Peterson. So
just something. She'll be going, oh, fucking Alex has sent me another YouTube. You'll be an Andrew Tate fan in 3 months.
But I don't think I'll change my mind on him, given what I've seen. But anyway.
No, and you'll have your reasons for that, right? And yeah, for sure. But if there's anything that you come across in terms of books that you think might be good for me to read too, I'd appreciate your recommendation. But appreciate you coming down from London. Up from London, where are we? To do this. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you.
I can speak to you for hours, by the way.
Yeah,
we just touched the surface.
That's very interesting. Thank you, Alex.
Nice one, man.